Marcus Webb had flour on his hands at 4:47 in the morning and a foreclosure notice on the wall behind him that he hadn't taken down yet, because taking it down felt like pretending something had been resolved that hadn't. He'd bought the bakery 11 days ago with the last $38,000 of the insurance settlement. His father's policy, the one his father had paid into for 31 years and never once used, and the ovens didn't work properly yet, and the espresso machine had a cracked gasket, and his 8-year-old daughter Nora was asleep in the back room on a cot they'd dragged from the apartment, because the apartment was gone too. He hadn't planned any of this, but then, 6 months ago, he hadn't planned on being walked out of Callaway Strategic Partners in front of 43 employees by a security guard named Pete, who had apologized quietly with his eyes the entire length of the hallway, and Marcus had nodded at him because Pete was just doing his job. The woman who had ordered that walk, Diana Callaway, 41 years old. Her name was on the building. Her grandfather had started the firm in 1968, and her father had built it into a $2.1 billion asset management company before handing it to her at 35, and she had grown it another $400 million in 4 years, and she did not lose things. That was the central fact of her life. She did not lose things, which was why, when her lead analyst uncovered a discrepancy in a pension fund restructuring plan that Marcus had been warning about internally for 4 months, she had accepted the narrative that Marcus was the discrepancy, that he had flagged the problem not to protect the clients, but to position himself to sell the solution, that the whole thing had been engineered. She had fired him on a Tuesday morning with a letter her lawyers had already written and a check that covered 3 months and not 1 day more. She had not looked up from her desk when he left. Marcus hadn't told Nora any of this. He'd told her they were starting something new. She had looked at him the way she always looked at him, the same careful, unhurried attention her mother had possessed before the accident, and she'd said, "Okay, Dad, what are we starting?" The bakery had been his father's dream before it was his. Marcus Sr. had talked about it for 30 years. A corner shop, good bread, the smell of something real in the morning, and had died of a stroke at 68 without ever having opened one. Marcus had spent 15 years in finance and had understood, for the first time standing in that empty shop with its burned-out sign and its ghost of cinnamon in the walls, that he had been trying to make his father proud in the wrong direction. He'd bought it. He'd started learning. He was learning the morning Diana Callaway walked through the door. She was not supposed to be in this part of the city. She had a driver and a standing reservation at 3 different restaurants within 2 blocks of her office, and she had not been in this neighborhood since a site visit 7 years ago for a client whose name she no longer remembered. But her driver had taken a wrong turn. Truly, inexplicably. A wrong turn she'd witnessed and said nothing about because she'd been on the phone, and now the car was idling on a block she didn't recognize, and the bakery was the only thing open, and she needed coffee before the 7 a.m. board call, and so she pushed open the door. The bell above it rang. Marcus looked up from the work table. The moment lasted about 4 seconds. It was enough. She recognized him first. She was good with faces. It was a professional skill, cultivated over 2 decades of boardrooms, and Marcus Webb's face had been across a conference table from her for 3 years before she'd fired him, and she had looked at it more carefully than she'd ever allowed herself to acknowledge. She felt the recognition as something physical. A drop in temperature, a sound slightly out of register. She did not move. Marcus recognized her second. He set down the bench scraper he was holding. That was all. His face did not change. "You're open," she said. It was not a question. It was the first sentence she could find. "Soft open," he said. "Espresso machine needs a new gasket. I have drip coffee and whatever came out of the oven at 4. She looked at him for another moment. He had gone back to the dough. She should have left. She understood, standing in that doorway, that she should have left. Instead, she walked to the counter and sat down on one of the 3 stools he'd salvaged from a restaurant closure in March, and she did not look at her phone, and she did not compose a sentence about why she was there, and she did not manage the situation. She sat. He poured the coffee without asking how she took it. He set it in front of her. Then he slid a plate down the counter, no ceremony, no presentation, with 2 things on it she didn't have a name for. Cardamom morning bun, he said. Recipe I'm testing. Tell me what's wrong with it. She looked at him. You're asking me to critique your baking. You worked with quarterly projections for 20 years, he said. You can tell when something isn't right. That's a skill. It transfers. It was the most he had said to her since she'd fired him. It was also, and this was the part she couldn't find a way to look at directly, the most anyone had trusted her instincts in approximately 6 months. She took a bite. She considered it the way she considered everything, seriously, without performance. The cardamom is right, she said. But something in the middle is dense. Like the center didn't get the same heat. He nodded. He made a single note on the paper beside the worktable. He didn't explain the technical reason, didn't tell her she was right. He just wrote it down, and there was something in that, in the not explaining, that landed strangely in her chest. She was still trying to identify the feeling when the door to the back room opened, and Nora came out. She was 8 years old and wearing a t-shirt from a science museum in a city she'd visited before her mother died, and she was carrying a small brass compass that she held the way other children held stuffed animals. Not as a toy, but as a fact. A thing that oriented the world correctly. She stopped when she saw Diana. She looked at her with the same unhurried attention her father looked at everything. Are you here for the soft open? She said. I think so, Diana said. Yes, Dad's been practicing the buns for 2 weeks. The first batch was bad. He doesn't like it when I say that, but it's true. Nora, Marcus said. It's getting better, though, she said, with the generosity of someone who has considered the full picture and decided to be honest, but kind. She climbed onto the stool beside Diana. She set the compass on the counter between them. Diana looked at it. She had the instinct, the trained instinct of someone who had navigated powerful rooms her entire life, to say something polished and adult that would establish appropriate distance. She opened her mouth. My mom's, Nora said. It always points home. She said it the way she said everything, as a simple fact, with no awareness that it was devastating. Diana closed her mouth. She looked down at the compass for a moment. Then she looked at Marcus. He was watching his daughter. His hands had stopped moving. He was not performing anything. He was just there, in that moment, watching his child, and the weight of what he had built in the ruins of everything else was somehow visible in the stillness of his hands. Diana looked back at her coffee. She was off balance in a way she couldn't articulate and did not try to. She drank the coffee. She did not reach for her phone. She had been there 20 minutes when the second customer walked through the door. She recognized him before she should have. Before she registered the sound of his footsteps. Before she'd fully turned on the stool. It was the way he walked, that particular stride that announced itself, that arrived before the man did. Richard Fenwick, her firm's senior legal counsel, the man who had sat across from her 6 months ago and explained, quietly and with enormous care, that Marcus Webb had likely been engineering the pension situation all along, who had provided her the documentation, who had recommended the termination. He stopped 2 feet inside the doorway. He looked at Marcus. He looked at Diana. He straightened his left cuff, then his right. a habit she had seen so many times in so many boardrooms that she had stopped seeing it, and he smiled, and the smile contained nothing warm. "Diana," he said. "What an extraordinary coincidence." "Is it?" Marcus said from behind the counter. He did not phrase it as a question. He had gone back to work, or appeared to. His hands were moving. His attention was on Fenwick the way a door is closed, completely, without announcement. "I heard you'd bought a place," Fenwick said to Marcus. "A bakery. I heard that. I thought, well, it suited you. Appropriate scale." He glanced at Nora, who was watching him with the clear and undivided attention of a child who has learned to distinguish between people who mean things and people who perform them. He looked away first. "I need a word, Diana," he said. "About the Meridian filing. The boards." "No," Marcus said. Fenwick turned. "I'm sorry?" "You're going to say what you have to say," Marcus said. His voice was completely level. He picked up a pastry brush, dipped it, used it. "Or she's going to hear it later and wonder why she wasn't in the room. So go ahead." Something shifted in Fenwick's face. Not alarm. Something more careful than alarm. "I'm not sure this is the venue for the Meridian Pension Trust," Marcus said. "The restructuring that was approved April of last year. The one with the amended variance clause that your paralegal filed under a supporting brief so it wouldn't get flagged in the primary review. The Cayman account, Fenwick Advisory Holdings LLC, account number ending in 4471, received 4 wire transfers totaling $2.3 million between February and September of the same year. The Sex Office of Investigations has had an open inquiry since January. I imagine they'll want to know who at Callaway knew and when." The room was very quiet. Fenwick did not straighten his cuffs. His hands stayed at his sides. "That's a remarkable set of allegations," he said. He had gone very still in the way water goes still just before it boils. "It's a remarkable set of documents," Marcus said. "Which I put in a courier envelope 14 days ago, addressed to someone at the SEC who I knew from Wharton, whose extension I had saved in my phone, which meant I didn't need to go through the main line." He set the pastry brush down. "She called me back in 40 minutes. Diana was not looking at Fenwick. She was looking at Marcus. Her coffee was in her hands and she had forgotten it was there." Fenwick turned and walked out. He did not straighten his cuffs. He did not close the door behind him. He moved through it as though the door were not there, as though the conversation were not there, as though none of this were happening in a way he needed to account for, and that performance of indifference was the most frightened thing she had ever seen. The bell above the door rang once as he left. Nora looked at the door. Then she looked at her father. "He didn't buy anything," she said. "No," Marcus said. She considered this. She picked up her compass. That was rude, she decided, and climbed down from the stool and went back to the room behind the counter, and the door closed quietly after her. Diana set her cup down. She looked at her hands. Then she looked at Marcus. "I fired you," she said, "because he told me to. I know. I read the documentation he gave me. I believed it. I know that too. I should have. I knew you. I knew your work for 3 years. I should have." She stopped. She did not finish the sentence, because the finish was a list of things she should have done that would have taken hours to say and still wouldn't have covered it. Marcus looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the worktable and picked up the bench scraper again. "The gasket for the espresso machine comes in Thursday," he said. "I'm open at 5. Come back Thursday. I'll have something better than drip coffee." She was quiet for a long time. "Why?" she said finally. It escaped before she'd decided to ask it. He didn't answer immediately. He worked the dough. Outside, the city was getting light. "Because Nora asked me yesterday what kind of person starts their day by making something good for other people," he said. "And I want to be that person, and I want her to see that. That's all." Diana stood. She left $40 on the counter. Too much, and she knew it, and she did it anyway. She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame. "I'm going to make this right," she said. "The termination, your record, whatever it takes." "It's already right," Marcus said. He looked up once. Thursday, 5 o'clock. She walked out into the morning, which was cold and getting lighter, and the door closed behind her, and she stood on the sidewalk for a moment before she moved, feeling, for the first time in a very long time, that something had just pointed her toward home. 1 year later, the bakery had a line down the block on Saturday mornings, and Nora had a reading corner behind the counter that 3 regular customers had contributed books to without being asked. And Marcus had hired 2 people who he paid fairly and thanked by name every day. The foreclosure notice was gone from the wall. In its place was a framed photograph, the morning bun recipe, handwritten, with Nora's note in the corner, "Dad's best." Diana came in on Thursday mornings, the way she'd started coming the Thursday after the morning Fenwick walked out. She and Nora talked about the compass, about science museums, about the mathematical relationship between navigation and bread rising, which Nora had decided was a real thing, and had spent 2 weeks trying to prove. She and Marcus talked about very little. They were in the same room. The room was warm. The bread was good. The investigation into Fenwick's activities was ongoing, as these things are, slow, and official and thorough in the way that matters more than the speed of it. 3 former Callaway clients had been contacted. The documentation Marcus had provided had opened 2 additional inquiries. Diana had waived the confidentiality clause in his termination agreement. She had done this voluntarily, without being asked, before her lawyers had finished explaining why it was inadvisable. Nora set the brass compass on the counter between them one Thursday morning and looked at Diana with the clear eyes of a person who sees what she sees and says what she means. "It points home," she said, "even when you don't know where that is yet." Diana looked at Marcus. He was watching his daughter. His hands were still. Some things are built in silence, from what remains after everything else has burned, and they are the things that last. The bread made before dawn. The light kept on for whoever walks through the door. The compass held until home becomes something you recognize. If someone handed you the evidence that could set things right, at real cost, with no guaranteed outcome, would you send it, or would you protect what you'd managed to rebuild? Tell us in the comments. We read every one. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe. We have more stories like this one coming every week.